Warm welcome, George, to our conversation today.
Hello, Lajos.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And as a preparation for this conversation, we had a chat already, and we mutually agreed that our world is really increasingly complex and very difficult to interpret. And we discussed how many multiple forces shape the rules of what is probable and what is possible. And we also agreed a little bit that how we do business and how we work will not be the same, and it's changing as we speak. And this will have a great impact also how teams can thrive in this very high complexity environment. Could you tell us a few things about how do you see what are those multiple forces that shape this high complexity environment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I'd have to say that I think today, for any leader of a team, at whatever level they are working in the organization, and in any organization, in any industry, it is more tough, it's harder to lead a team than in any other time we've ever experienced. There's a number of forces that make this a very complex discipline. And I've done some research on this, and I think there are six clear reasons why there's a lot of complexity. And the first one is obvious, really, is the march towards digitalization and digital transformations. Who here isn't going through some form of digital program to make their programs more digital, their businesses more digital? We've got virtual working even before COVID. We all know now we're doing this on Zoom. We're not doing this face to face. So COVID has had an impact. But even before COVID, virtual working was a growing phenomena. I think something like over 80% of workers in organizations have reported before COVID that they were in a team that had some virtual membership. And of those, 1 in 4 of those teams had more than you were a member of more than one, up to 4 teams, actually. So if you were virtual working, you were members of several teams. So that's the third aspect of complexity, which is diversification and diversity, not just of gender and age, ethnicity, but also we are members of more teams. We have global teams, so it's more complex in that sense. Fourthly, we have growing societal individualism. So teaming is about collectivism and being part of a group and having a strong sense of membership. But societally, we know, and the sociologists will tell us, as we are getting richer, as in our nations, and capitalism is growing, GDP goes up, individualism also goes up. So the idea of being in a team is more challenging. We also have mental health as another pressure. Team leaders have to be coaches and aware of mental health issues and how to respond and what to do with those situations now in the Me Too movement and a lot of other higher, very public sort of focuses on mental health. And we have extra regulation and compliance is a 6th one. Okay, so there's more regulation and forces of pressure from regulators, and no one likes that. It's more hierarchy, it's more systems, more controls. So I think put those things together, you have a perfect storm of factors making life very difficult for leaders in our organizations.
Absolutely, and I think you mentioned this 6th one, which is I think not just relevant for teams; it's relevant for everybody who is working and is trying to achieve something and trying to progress. If you would narrow it down a little bit and just put it into a team context, what are the 1 or 2 that you think are the strongest from the 6 ones? And how do they influence teamwork?
Well, I mean, okay, so that's a good question. We have to prioritize. They're all relevant. They're all happening. They all work together, okay, in the system. However, the 2 most important, I think, and I'm sure others would agree in the audience, are the ones that are most obvious, which is digitalization and virtual working. And so let's just take those in turn. So digitalization in 2020, Gartner reported, did a very big survey, and 67% of senior leaders across the globe agreed that unless their businesses were to radically become more digitalized, they would not be competitive. Okay, that was in 2020. So it's happening everywhere, right? And the effect of digitalization, the impact on the team leaders is one of constant change, rapid technological advancement happening in very fast time. So we have to have a certain resilience and a certain change orientation. We have to be fast and be able to pivot. And pivoting is not an individual sport. We tend to think about having change-orientated individuals, and we recruit change-orientated people, and we train for adaptation. But actually pivoting in the digitalized world is really a team sport, because you don't change individually, you change in teams. And when other teams change, your team has to change usually, because we're part of an ecosystem. So we have to pivot. And the other consequence of digitalization is that teaming is even more important. We operate now in teams of teams, and we have to share knowledge very quickly and transfer knowledge very quickly and be quick to the marketplace to make our changes. So team working is even more important than ever before because of digitalization. I think if we look at virtual working, then the impacts of virtual working are really, there's three classic impacts that we have in virtual working, which is first one is productivity. And before we had a lot of virtual working, many managers, many CEOs, and I have CEO clients, and they would say to me, I'm not sure about this working from home business, George. I preferred people to be in the office. I know what they're doing. And really the issue that they faced was one of a fear of people would not be working hard, right? Because of remote working. And of course, the reality is that it isn't the lack of productivity is the issue. It's the overproductivity, or at least the overstress of being in front of a screen, working without the commute, not having the boundaries. So the issue is a reverse in many ways of what people thought. Issue number two is one of trust and conflict. Right? There's more conflict in a virtual team than there is in a non-virtual team, because we make interpretations over limited information. So it's harder to trust people in a virtual situation than it is in a face-to-face situation. And we tend to worry about people's intentions, and we tend to worry about whether they're pulling their weight, and we complain about decision making, and we tend to complain about the speed of things, and that causes more conflict. So there's certainly a little bit more conflict. Trust is harder. And the third issue with virtual team working is isolation, mental health. And we don't have to really talk about that too much. It's obvious, there's issues of mental health that is depression and violence in the households, and helplines are going more crazy since COVID. And people we're naturally relationship centric as human beings. That's what we want to do. So if we are not able to touch and put our arm around somebody, or to high five, or to be together and have the closeness, then most people feel somewhat disconnected and not so happy, right? So those are three issues with virtual: productivity, isolation, and extra conflict.
George, you mentioned all these three. You mentioned also resilience, being more sensitive, what's going on, managing a little bit differently the conflict situations, and maybe tuning a little bit better, or maybe a little bit differently in this type of environment. If you look at leaders, so what leaders should do differently? What comes to your mind? What would be your suggestion?
Well, there's some practical things for a virtual team, which I'll come on to in a second. I think the bigger issue facing leaders, and indeed leaders of leaders, and HR and learning and development professionals in working with leaders is we need to have, in digitalization, the big thing with the pace of change, we have to have a very strong adaptability. Adaptability means we have to learn. Okay, so the team has to be a learning team, and that's easier said than done. You don't just create a learning team and say, okay, we're going to learn. You have to have conditions for learning, and without psychological safety, and without people feeling that they are able to have good emotions because they feel safe, then the learning doesn't occur, right? So we need to have learning through lots of feedback, retroflections. This morning I was working with a client, a European client, and they have good, reasonably, they're an agile organization, and the agile teams are great because they have these things called retroflections, right? So they feedback on their sprints, and they're a good learning team. The non-agile teams in this organization, they had less of the feedback conversations. They didn't retroflect. We know from the science that teams that spend some time talking about how they're working and what they can learn about their working are much more successful than those that don't. So teams need to be far more involved in what we call these feedback conversations about how they're working together. Okay, these are team level conversations, not one-to-one, but team level conversations. Team leaders need to have skills in being great at building psychological safety. What does that mean? It means they have to be leaders have to be a little bit more vulnerable, be a bit more honest, not so perfect, say when they make mistakes, and allow people to feel safe around them. We need team leaders that are much more empathic. They can read the tone of voice, the look, even on the screen. They can see if someone's got dark lines under their eyes or something. They can pick up the feelings. And they also have to have these learning, as I said, these feedback, and really promote feedback conversations. So those are several things that leaders in a digitalized team need to do. And I think the third thing for the teams is they have to convert. This is really important. They have to convert the safety to something of value, right? Because psychological safety, in a way, is a means to an end. So yes, I feel safe, I trust you, but the team has to convert that into something that is going to produce value for the organization, right? So that means that the team leader has to be able to help team members to become more influential and better at collaborating and holding people to account and being stronger and more assertive in their discussions. So they have to have good constructive tension with other teams and not just be passive or be too nice. I think that's a really key skill, is influencing skills across the system. I think for the virtual team leader, it's very straightforward. There's a lot of good science about what makes good virtual team leaders, and one of the key things is a little bit different to what some of the other commentators or writers are saying. They're talking about, let's start with building vulnerability-based trust. Let's talk about psychological safety. Let's get to know each other. Actually, the best way to build trust in a virtual team, and indeed in a non-virtual team, is what the science is saying. We build what we call task-related trust. We build trust based upon being on the same page. And that means in a virtual team, very important, we're very clear on our goals, very clear on our roles, very clear on our purpose, very clear on our target norms. We are on the same page. And we don't imagine that. We don't assume that we're on. We know we are, because we talk about it and because we have written it down. And so that's a really key thing, is that task level trust. That gets converted to interpersonal trust a little later on in the way that we discuss and converse. The second important feature of leading a virtual team is distributed leadership. Okay, now in some situations we can do a little bit of command and control, a little bit of you follow me, and and that's, it's not ideal, but it's okay. In the virtual team, it's not good at all. We want to spread the leadership across the team and not have a single point of bottleneck. We want to make sure people understand and agree on responsibilities that allow them to spread the leadership. And that, research says, is a much better way of running a virtual team than having too many funnels going into the single leader. And also part of that, of course, is knowing where the sub-teams are, right? So we don't just spread at individual level, one-to-one. We want to be spreading our leadership and our responsibilities into smaller teams, teams of 3, teams of 2, teams of 4. They share the goals and they work with the goals and each other. And the leader can get out of the way a little bit more, okay? And then the third interesting piece from science about virtual teams is being very definitive and very explicit about expectations in terms of actions and explicit with progress. So we want real, direct, obvious communications about what is being done and when it is being done. So we have that certainty. In a virtual team, there's a little bit more uncertainty. We imagine things. So again, the research tells us if a virtual team leader wants to be effective, then let's make things very clear, very explicit, especially with actions and progress.
George, I think this is a couple of very good suggestions what to look out for as a leader. We are in this HR Fest, a lot of HR professionals who are keen to have their teams, their organizations, to elevate them and maybe provide the context in which they can develop and also realize a few suggestions what you just said. So what would be your maybe 1 or 2 very short and snappy suggestions for HR folks, HR professionals? How to have this?
Yeah, so, okay. So very simply, very quickly, HR professionals, my advice to you would be to start to move more away from individual 360-degree assessments of leaders and start to do team assessments. Judge the leader not on a 360, but judge a leader on the effectiveness of their teams. This is a different shift. We've had 360s, we've had psychometrics, they're tried and tested. The time now, I think, is to move more into team-based interventions, measurement and team-based coaching. Again, executive coaching tends to be one-to-one, and I do a little bit of executive coaching, but most of the work I do is team-based coaching that involves a little bit of executive coaching, but that's positioned as team coaching. And so the leaders have their ego less. It's not about them, it's about the team. I think it's a very important framing conversation. And then, of course, the other thing that they need to be doing is having an ecosystem of teams, rewarding in their reward mechanisms, collaboration between teams, making sure that people have shared goal, they're rewarded for shared goal working. Okay, and that takes a little bit more time to do that because it makes it more complicated, but it'll be worth it. If you reward people for what you want, you tend to get what you want.
George, thank you very much for sharing all those very interesting insights and a bit of science, but also very practical tips and points. And I know that you are working on a book of yours in which I guess if you are interested to see your views on this one, further tips and tricks, we would be able to read it in there. Can you talk about that book in 1 sentence?
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity to give my book a plug. So it's going to be published by Mango Publishing, a global organization based in America. And the book is, funnily enough, which is why I'm happy to talk about this, the book is on about the changes that we're seeing in our society for teams. It's about a new code. It's about a sequence that I've developed that allows team leaders to follow a code that is better suited for these new environments, digital teams and virtual teams. It introduces this sequence, this code. There's only 3 parts of the code: setting the team up, getting on the same page, getting them safe, and getting them strong. And the science backs up this direction. It's different to other writers. They don't use the code. I have developed this, and this is what the book is about. And Yeah, and they can see more about that on my LinkedIn page as well. They want to visit me on LinkedIn, and the website TeamUp is also available to look at. We have some good white papers about how we develop that code as well, the story behind it.
Well, then, thank you very much, George, for being here, sharing your very interesting insights and thoughts with us. And as you mentioned in your book, I wish to every team to stay safe and be on the same page and be strong. This is basically what you mentioned. Your book is all about.
Yeah.
So I think if we can achieve all these three, then we are already on the right track. So thank you very much for sharing this, and I wish you all the success for your new book.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stay safe and healthy.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.